Germany fears economic collapse as Russia has suspended the flow of gas through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline due to planned maintenance. Also, Russia has cut the flow of gas to Italy by a third due to maintenance issues, and the EU has no plan for economic existence without cheap Russian energy. Joining us to discuss this, we have Dr. Gerald Horne. He's a professor of history at the University of Houston, Texas, an author, historian, and researcher. Dr. Horne, welcome back to the Critical Hour.
Thank you for inviting me.
The flow of Russian gas to Germany through the Nord Stream 1 Baltic Sea pipeline was suspended on Monday. Operator Nord Stream AG said that routine maintenance work would shut down the infrastructure for 10 days. Energy major Eni announced on Monday that Russia's Gazprom had further reduced the supply of natural gas to Italy as scheduled maintenance work begins on the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. Gazprom announced that today it will supply the Eni volumes of gas of approximately 21 million cubic meters per day, while the average for the last few days was of about 32 million cubic meters per day. Dr. Horne, sounds like there's trouble in gas land for the EU. Your thoughts, sir?
Well, that certainly seems to be the case. And I think if we try to look at this matter from 30,000 feet, it's obvious that many Western European nations are in a crunch right now. Because on the one hand, these sub-imperialist nations like German imperialism, Italian imperialism, they have to rely upon the big dog, U.S. imperialism, as the ultimate guarantor of world imperialism. The problem with that approach is that U.S. imperialism is a bellicose, belligerent, militaristic nation that over the decades has managed to repress and suppress radicalism domestically, which has simultaneously strengthened the right wing and the hawks, which then causes ever more disasters and catastrophes, such as Iraq, Afghanistan. The list is too lengthy to mention. And Germany has a particular problem because U.S. imperialism, as a result of the post-World War II dispensation, continues to operate military bases on German soil, not to mention the fact that there are many, particularly within the German elite, which is thankful to Uncle Sam for pressing 30-odd years ago for the liquidation of the then German Democratic Republic, speaking of what was once socialist Germany, and its incorporation into the capitalist Federal Republic of Germany. And that, too, constricts Berlin's ability to protest these escapades, such as the one in Ukraine, which, of course, was preceded by the existence of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which by all measures should have gone out of business after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but instead motored on and found other messes to get involved in. And then there's the domestic German issue, which is that the Greens, which are in coalition with Chancellor Scholz's Social Democrats, supposedly or purportedly, they seem to feel that in order to gain traction with the German elite, they have to appear to be hawkish. And so they have pressed, perhaps even more than some of the Social Democrats, on arming the Kiev regime and deepening this quagmire in Ukraine. And that makes it even more curious in the face of the reality we noticed a few days ago, where the Greens apparently acquiesced to this idea that there should be a reestablishing of nuclear power in Germany and treating certain fossil fuels as being part of a green energy solution. This is the pretzel into which the Greens have tied themselves in order to go along, ultimately, with U.S. imperialism. But a interesting note was sounded just a few days ago in London by U.S. FBI Director Christopher Wray, who appeared alongside his British counterpart, and they took the opportunity on the occasion of this extraordinary meeting of this toxic duo that China should not be forgotten. They issued an entire litany of charges and allegations about the People's Republic of China. But all that served to illustrate is this lingering question: if China is so important, why is so much attention being given to Ukraine and Russia? This also came up a few days ago, or in the last 24 to 48 hours, at the G20 foreign ministers meeting in Indonesia, where you saw that the so-called G7, led by the United States and the leading capitalist countries, aided by Japan and, of course, titular member South Korea, sought to boycott Russia and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and the other members did not go along because they're not endorsing the sanctions crusade. And what was really revealing about Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, his exposition was ultimately ludicrous, because what he was telling the Chinese foreign minister is this: could you please join us in confronting Russia so we can confront China more effectively? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Basically, why should China join Washington in confronting Russia when all that will do is hasten the day when U.S. imperialism can focus like a laser beam on China? This is the contradiction. This is the trap into which U.S. imperialism has stumbled. And as of today, there seems to be no way out.
In terms of stumbling, in terms of referencing the trap, this whole issue around Russia suspending operation of major gas to Europe, the story in these stories is this was a pre-planned stoppage, that the situation was well flagged and had previously been agreed to by all of the partners. And also, it talks about, in terms of the cut back of oil to Italy, that if Russia decides to cut back the gas deliveries altogether, Italy will find itself in a recession. So it just appears that time after time after time, the United States, trying to implement or employ its hegemony, it just continues to shoot itself and its allies in the feet.
Well, that is for sure. And I think we should also mention the point that with regard to this meeting in Indonesia, which included such heavyweights as leaders from Saudi Arabia and South Africa, Indonesia, and all the rest, Turkey as well, that those representatives there of the global South not only do not necessarily fear the North Atlantic hegemons, because they see the North Atlantic hegemons are bogged down in Ukraine. There are credible stories about the North Atlantic countries actually running out of ammunition as they seek to supply the Ukrainians. But as well, there is a credible alternative in the form of the BRICS nations led by China, which can, as we've noted on these airways before, can build a new capital for Zimbabwe on the outskirts of the present capital, Harare, can build a light rail system for Cairo as it seeks to construct a new capital on the outskirts of that Egyptian metropolis. And we see that Argentina and Iran, among other nations, are making applications to join the BRICS. But at the same time, let me point listeners to a striking book review yesterday in the New York Times about, of all matters, hogs in North Carolina, operated by Smithfield, which is ultimately controlled by Chinese interests. And what's interesting is that these hog factories create more waste than that created by humans in New York City. And yet there's no treatment. It's unleashed into the atmosphere and into the ground. And China does not allow such on its soil because of stricter environmental laws. And the takeaway ultimately from such apiece, is that increasingly the United States is in a rather strange relationship with China. It's almost like the United States is a neocolonial appendage, which exports raw materials to China and allows its territory to be despoiled by China, just like Britain despoiled the territory of so many African nations in the bad old days. And in return, the United States receives finished goods, laptops, color televisions, and all the rest. And so not only is a person like myself able to see this contradiction, this can also be seen in the global South, and they're beginning to wonder if the global North, so-called, really knows what they're doing, something that had occurred in 2008 with the financial collapse on Wall Street, but that particular perception is gaining velocity, I'm afraid to say, with every passing day.
And Dr. Horne, I did want to ask you this: with what's happening in Sri Lanka, I look at that. I look at what's going on with the tractors and the farmers, I believe, in Holland, and I think to myself, that may be the fate of Europe. And looking at the issues they're having with gas, they're wondering, will the gas actually come on at the end of these of the 10 days? Your thoughts on is there a possibility that at some point someone will be swimming in Olaf Scholz's presidential pool before this thing's all over with?
Well, I think we should take seriously your reference to what's taking place in Colombo and Sri Lanka, where the president and prime minister are in hiding as protesters have overrun the presidential palace and the prime minister's residence. I dare say not only is Olaf Scholz contemplating that might be his fate, but as Mr. Biden heads east to Saudi Arabia and Israel, the thought may have occurred to him as well, particularly in light of the impending January 6 hearings tomorrow morning. That is to say that Mr. Biden is going to Saudi Arabia, hat in hand, begging the Saudis to break their oil relationship with Russia, which is dubious, is doubtful, and asking for the Saudis to somehow lower the price of gasoline at the pump so that inflation will go down in the United States and that Mr. Biden's party, the Democrats, might face more favorable electoral prospects. He's actually asking the Saudis to leave cash on the table for his benefit. And in light of how Mr. Biden was excoriating the Saudi regime when he was running for president, it's doubtful if that will occur. And as for NATO, the NATO countries, much has been made of this notion that Finland and Sweden will be joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But if you look at the small print, you will quickly notice that they will have to deport Kurdish nationals from Finland and Sweden that the Turkish regime has demanded. And that will put them in a corner because I doubt if they will comply, which will wreck the possibility of them joining NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And so with regard to NATO and its ultimate honcho in Washington, D.C., the bad news just keeps on coming.
We've been talking with Dr. Gerald Horne. He's a professor of history at the University of Houston, Texas. He's an author, a historian, and a researcher. He's got a number of books. Just go online anywhere you can find books, and there's a lot of great books out by Dr. Gerald Horne.